Series 66.12, where we discuss the 12th book of the Bible, 2 Kings. 2 Kings, as we have talked about, is a part of a larger context of 4 books that talks about the history of the kings of Israel. Here, the theme of good and evil continue to work. Each of the kings of Israel had moments of success, moments where they were faithful to God. But they also had moments where they failed, morally, militarily, and of course in their leadership. And so the nation of Israel rises and falls with the success of the kings. In 2 Kings, we are introduced to multiple kings from the northern and the southern kingdom. At this time in Israel's history, there are 2 kingdoms. One is known as the nation of Israel, the other is the nation of Judah. And we hear about kings from both of these nations in this book. We also are introduced more to the prophet Elisha. Elisha has taken over for Elijah as the prophet, the one who would call out the kings and the nation for the things that they did poorly. And Elisha is throughout the book talking to the kings and to the people and making his presence known. Early in the book, Elijah is asking Elisha, before I leave, is there anything I can do for you? Elijah knew that he was going to God. He knew his time was up. And so he asked Elijah, what can I do for you? And Elisha says, would you please give me double of the spirit that you have from God? And Elijah says that if it is to be, this is a large request that you have, if it is to be, you will see me exit this world, and then it will be so. Elijah is taken up in a chariot of fire, the famous story that we know, that Elijah did not die, but he was taken up in a chariot of fire into heaven and is there with God in heaven now. Elisha witnesses this and knows that he is now blessed by God to be a person of wisdom, of strength, and of calling the people to account. I want to tell you the story, a brief story that's found in 2 Kings chapter 4. It's actually only 7 verses long, but I think it has a lot for us to learn here in our time and our day. In 2 Kings chapter 4, we hear about a widow who goes to Elisha and asks him to help her. You see, her husband has died, and in this particular day, husbands were certainly responsible for taking care of their families, and she admits to Elisha that because her husband is gone, his creditors, the ones whom he owed money, are coming after her and are threatened to take her sons away to make them slaves to pay for the debts of her husband. And so she asks, is there anything you can do to help me in this situation? And Elisha says, well, what do you have? She says, all I have left is just a small amount of oil. And Elijah says, go to your neighbors, go to your friends. Ask them for empty jars. Ask them to give you all of the empty jars that you can find. So she goes and she begins to ask her neighbors, and she gets many, many jars, and she comes back and she says, I've gotten all the jars I can. Now what? And he says to her, go and take the amount of oil that you have and begin to pour it. Pour it into those jars that have come from your neighbors and friends. She seems a little skeptical. Why would I do this? I only have a little bit of oil. How in the world can I do it in all of these particular containers? So she goes and she begins to pour. And a miracle happens that the oil continues to expand and grow and fill all of the containers that are there. She finally stops and all the containers are full, and she goes to Elijah and she says, it's been done. I don't have any more containers. I've asked, I've begged, I've borrowed, I've looked in every place that I have. I have no more containers to hold the oil. And he says, now you have your answer. Go sell the oil. Use the money to pay back your creditors, and the rest you and your sons can live on. The interesting thing about this story is that it is about a miracle, but it's also about abundance. You see, the woman believed that she had very little, that she didn't have enough, certainly to pay her creditors, but also to keep her sons. I wonder what it looks like for us to look around us and imagine that we just don't have enough. This is known as the mindset of scarcity. That we think of enough being in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our spiritual lives, in our finances, enough to get by and to do the things we need to do. But we also look for and think about being more than enough. We want abundance in our life. We want to be comfortable, but we also want to enjoy what is around us. There's a concept that community planners have been using for years. It's called asset mapping. And what it does is it looks at the assets that are around you in a community and then evaluates those assets based on the needs of the community as well, and where can these two meet. One of the greatest ways that this is shared and talked about is in a famous story called Stone Soup. The woman in 2 Kings was looking for help. She found it from her neighbors and her friends as they offered her the jars that would be eventually filled with oil. But she also had a miraculous help from Elisha, where that oil was expanded and used to help her family. In the story of Stone Soup, there is a soldier who's walking through a town, coming from battle and making his way back home. As he comes into town, people are scared and they begin to fade. They get to go into their homes and hide away. He's looking for a little assistance. He's looking for food. He's looking for sustenance. Ultimately, he's looking for community. But everybody's afraid. And so he knocks on a few doors asking for assistance, and they all say they don't have enough. Door after door, person after person sends him away. They don't have enough to share. And so he comes to the middle of town. He takes a pot out of his pack, and he puts a little bit of water in it from a spring. And curious onlookers from the community are asking him what he's doing. And he says, "I'm making stone soup." It's wonderful. He puts a couple stones inside the pot along with some water and begins to stir and smells the aroma. And he says, "You know what would make stone soup so much better? A few carrots." One of the onlookers says, "I think I have some," and runs to his cellar. Chop up the carrots and put them in there. And he says, "You know what else would make stone soup look so good? A little bit of beef." Another onlooker goes and gets some beef and chops it up and places it in the pot. This goes on, and more ingredients get added. Onions, celery, spices. After a while, the soup is done, and people begin to enjoy it together. The importance of stone soup is not so much the ingredients that people ended up sharing, but it's the community that gathers around them. The person in 2 Corinthians, the woman who was in need, got help from her neighbors because they were able to give just a little bit. Throughout the story of 2 Kings, we hear of great pain, difficulty, and a lack of leadership, and leadership that failed. But right in the midst of that, we see good people. People in a community who help, encourage, and share. My friends, I think this is a story that we need to hear. This is a lesson we need to take to heart. We live in a time when our leaders are failing us. We live in a time where we are polarized because of politics, of religion, of background, of culture. This is on a national and international stage. But in our very own backyard, in our very own community, we have things that unite us, things that bind us. And it is this which we focus on and think about as we look to the book of 2 Kings. I invite you to explore it sometime, and I invite you to continue on our journey as we go through this series 66, looking at all 66 of the books of the Bible over time. I hope this has been a blessing to you today, and I hope you are blessed by God the rest of your day.